7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Project Egg Show. I'm your host, Ben Gothard, and today we have the honor of speaking with Dai Manuel. And Dai, I have to ask you, what is your story?
Oh, well, like any story, there's multiple chapters, and in my case, lots of volumes too. So it's been a full life. I'm now 42 years young, I like to think, and I got a whole lot of life. I'm determined to be 120. When I kiss this mortal coil goodbye. But for me, I guess I grew up in Canada, Eastern Canada. Had a great upbringing. My parents separated when I was younger, like 9, almost 10. I took that pretty hard emotionally, psychologically, and at that time I started developing some patterns that weren't great. I started to overeat, lots of junk food, play a lot of video games, watch TV, movies, just quite withdrawn. And as a result, we all know if you do some of these negative habits over and over, they compound rather negatively. And I eventually got to the point where I was morbidly obese as a teen and hit the largest at age 14. And that was a trying time, to say the least, dealing with a lot of the stress and the anxiety that comes when you're in that state of unhealth and just that kind of a low self-opinion. And, I made some changes and that sort of got me started on this whole personal / professional development train, if you will. And ever since then, I've really dedicated my life to that. And in particularly how to help people, either see more in themselves, but also achieve more. And ultimately just get out of their own way, right? Like we have a tendency to put up walls all the time. As you know, you've had some of these amazing conversations, Ben, that I think what defines us is not necessarily the problems that we're facing, but really how we overcome them and we work around them. And I find that's really, as far as character development is concerned, those are like the milestone moments that really set in deep with us. And so I've had a number of those throughout my life. But right now, not talking about the past, not talking about the future. Right now, I'm enjoying life in Bali. I've been traveling with my family. I have 2 teenage daughters, age 16 and 14, Chardonnay and Brie. Yeah, figure that out. Wine and cheese, and a couple socialites in the making. And I've been dating my wife of 18 years now, Christy. She's also one of my best friends, and I'm fortunate to call her my spouse and partner in life and everything else. And we settled into Bali just over 2 years ago, and we just here to make an impact in the world in a great way. And we've been able to do that from the beaches of the world. So, that's me in a nutshell right now.
Curious to learn about this idea of really overcoming the challenges that we're faced with. And I love what you were saying about really, not being identified by our problems or maybe even building our identity from our problems, but of how we overcome them and building character through that. How did you come to that philosophy? Where did that ideology develop from?
Well, I think the seed was overcoming that first big one. Man, when I think back to my life at that time, it wasn't a bad life. It wasn't a sad life. It was a life. It was a life that I feel was not living up to what my potential was, and all for my own reasons. Like I was the one choosing to live that way. And my parents, what was really interesting, parents and even some really close friends, they're really encouraging about making changes. I think a lot of us have people that see us in pain, see us doing things that are hurting ourselves or holding us back or bringing us back to these lower energy states where we're just, just meh about life. And what do they want? They want to help us, right? They want us to help us change. But man, we'll be the last ones that want that help at that moment. I know I pushed a lot of people away because of that. I was offended. I was upset. I was an emotional teen, pre-puberty, just about to kick into puberty. You can just imagine. It's just like, everything was crazy. And, but one day, just one day, catching myself in the mirror of the bathroom, after getting out of the shower, I broke down. I did a scan. I locked eyes with myself. I did the scan down and up. And I was disgusted. I was just like, I don't even know who this person is. And I don't want to know them. You know, I was like, I'm going to do something about this. Because to be perfectly honest with you, Ben, I had suicidal thoughts and been thinking about that a lot, about ending my life. And I don't know, but that finality, it actually scared me more than the idea of just change. You know, I think there's a quote that says, you know, when the pain of not changing hurts more than the pain of changing, you know, you're ready to make a change, right? And so that was it. And I told that to my dad, and he was like, okay, well, what can we do to support you? And went and bought me a mountain bike, and they eventually got me a gym membership a few months later. And I just sought out mentorship. I think that was the big thing. I wanted someone that could sort of show me what was going on. And I always joke with my kids, I was like, yeah, I went to the library, got a stack of books out on nutrition and fitness. I'm like, you went to a library? Why didn't you just Google it, Dad? I'm like, because there wasn't any internet back then, you know? Like, and I'm like totally dating myself right now. But, you know, so I kicked it old school and just started living life differently than what I had been. I mean, I didn't go and try to do everything all at once. I just started to do little tweaks and just live differently than I had been before. Einstein's the one that said it, you know, keep doing the same thing, right? I knew that. And so I just started doing little things every day, riding my bike, you know, changing what I was eating, started filling my head with different inputs, you know, getting around different people. And that was sort of what planted that seed that here I was really evolving, if you will, to something that was more in alignment with what I wanted. And that was what was really powerful. So, I mean, that was the seed that really got me started in the whole mentorship thing and coaching and just helping others. Because from that experience that I went through personally, people saw that transformation. You know, it was fully realized in about 20 months. So it wasn't like a, you know, overnight thing, but it was gradual and consistent. But my attitude shifted dramatically and drastically. And that was what people noticed. And so they would often then start to ask me, you know, how could I help them? And asking very specific questions that were really in alignment with more with mentorship than coaching, because it happened to deal with what I had personally just gone through. And so that was what got it all started. So if you're thinking like ideology, and I don't, you know, it's more of a way of being, I think, than anything. It was just living into that which I wanted to be. And it sounds really kind of woo-ish, but that it was that simple. You know, like people say, was it really hard? I'm like, no. You know, it was hard to get to that place where I was ready to actually commit to living differently. That would, you know, I think it's Spiral Dynamics that talks about this idea that, you know, just before most people quit, you know, it's usually when it's the most challenging. But if you can just get through that, you know, and it's referred to, I forget, it's a Canadian guy, I forget, white hair guy. I always think that he's the glad garbage man guy, but he wouldn't like that. But he talks about the terror barrier and this idea that, you know, it just prevents us from just getting to that next level in life. But once you get through that challenge, like you really just weather the storm and you wait for the sun to break. It's like, wow, a recollection of what we just experienced, that is never as bad as what it was when we were in it, you know? And we have to remind ourselves of that, you know? Buddha said it 2,500 years ago, this too shall pass, you know? And Nietzsche. Anyways, I could go on all day about this stuff, but that's sort of just what got me started.
I love that. And I'm so fascinated by when you were talking about how you weren't living up to your potential and you knew it. And I'm curious about this concept of potential, because I feel like it's very hard to know, like, what is our potential? How high can we really reach, right? And I absolutely subscribe to the belief that we can do, besides like limiting physical barriers and maybe the laws of nature, I really feel like we can do almost anything that we want to do in our lives, you know, whether that be become an astronaut or go to the moon or, you know, put a music festival on the moon or, you know, whatever. I know I'm talking about space a lot. It's just on my mind.
I love it. It's great.
Yeah. But like, it seems to me like it's really hard to really quantify what our potential is and to get in touch with that. And it seems like that requires a lot of self-awareness and introspection and just a sense of connection with yourself. So how did you really quantify what your potential was? How did you know that you could do more? And how did you really push to see the limits of that, if there are limits?
That's a really good question, Ben. It's funny. I have this love-hate relationship with quantifying things. And the only reason being is, I spent a better part of my adult life very specifically working within the wellness industry. And the wellness industry, specifically the fitness vertical, is very, very good at quantifying everything. Because that's really where all the goals are around. There are a lot of goals that are always set when we're looking to make fitness transformations. Whether it's a number on a scale, whether it's how fast you can run a mile, whether it's how many reps you can do in the gym on the bench press. What's your body fat percentage? Like we have these metrics that we gauge everything on, and early on in my fitness career, that was a big deal, but it was what everybody was talking about. And it didn't work as well for me because I was like, there's got to be something more to this, because I would see clients get fantastic results on the short term. But then we'd see this regression as soon as they felt like, oh, well, I achieved the goal. I hit the number. Now what? There's this now what moment where things can either be tweaked and realigned with some new vision and goal, or we regress so we can go after it again. And so that's why you see the yo-yo diets and you see people make tremendous transformations, but then all of a sudden shift back. And that always troubled me. It really troubled me because when I made my shifts, I was like, there's no going back. Like, this is it, man. This is who I am. And so it was never a question. There was no plan B, And I guess when it comes to this idea of quantifying, I think it is important. I find that it's nice to have that because we can gauge progress, right? Through the quantification. However, it's the qualification, this qualifying of our goals, of our wants, of our desires, of our dreams, our visions, that I think is much more powerful. I often tell people, you're going to need a fair bit of motivation just to get started with any sort of changes or leveling up, if you will, in life or any aspect of it. But it's really finding the inspiration that keeps you going. I find inspiration is much more intrinsic than extrinsic, as most of the time these goals tend to be. And so it's looking for that internal pull rather than that external push. And when we can align with that, and sometimes that takes a while, right? Like, was it Simon Sinek that says you can't invent your why, but you got to discover it, something along those lines. I'm paraphrasing, but I always resonated with that because it's very, very true. You just sort of find it as you start to live into some of these changes you want to make. I mean, there's three questions that I always ask myself when I want to make some changes, whether they're superficial changes or something that's not going to be life-changing, but there's still changes that require some habits to be realigned or reformed, or in some cases just eliminated. It's like, can I do this? Is the very first question I think people should ask themselves. Because if you ask yourself, well, can I do this? Whatever this change might be, can I do this? Like for me, I've never run more than a half marathon. Like that is pushing the limits for me, just based on how I train and just really, I'm not a big fan of running. I'm like, running's good to run away from stuff or chase things. It's great. I see the utility in that, but just to go and run for fun, I'm like, it's a real struggle for me. But not to say I haven't enjoyed doing Tough Mudders and some of those different formats of running, because I feel like I just have a better connection. I got stuff to distract me. I've got other people to hang out with, and talk to, rather than just solo run. But can I do this? Can I run a marathon? Well, yeah, of course I can. Why can't I? Like it really comes down to often skill development. Right? There might be some mindset components as well, like really getting connected with this. Yes, I can do this. But really, that can be the motivation. But you have to ask yourself, like, is it a matter of education? Is it just leveling up some skills to be able to do what you want to do? And really, everyone's got that potential. So I'm just bringing this back to what the first question was, which is this idea of potential. And yeah, can we do this? Yeah, of course we can. Can I be an astronaut? Yeah, sure I can. I can. Now, it's just there's a very small scope of people that will reach that level, but you can go through the process. And whether you at the end result, well, you may not, but you may. But if you don't start doing what you need to be doing to move you closer towards the goal, you're never going to get up there. The second question is, if I do this, will it work? So if I start to do the things I know I ought to be doing to get me closer to this goal or vision or whatever it may be, is it going to work? Well, I know for myself, if I'm not getting off the couch and running every day, the odds of me getting closer to actually doing a full marathon distance isn't too, not likely. Okay. It's just not likely, or at least it won't be that much fun when I finally do it, But if I do this, will it work? And most of the time, especially today in this day and age, there's enough content online that we can gain the education and learn some of these skills. Then we have to practice the skills to further internalize them and get them to higher levels. But there's a lot of blueprints out there. There's a lot of roadmaps because we've seen other people do it. And so why can't I do it? I'm just going to do the same steps, It'll at least get me closer there. But the third one, and this is the question I think that really stumps most people. You've made this choice. Okay, I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to learn what I need to learn to allow me to do this thing. I know it'll work if I follow these steps. Or at the very least, it's going to get me closer, right? But the third one is it worth it? Is it worth it? And the crazy thing is, I think that needs to be reframed to, am I worth it? Because that is the one, that I think people really struggle with, is this personal connection and commitment to their value. And if they can get really honest with that and really, really dial that in and be able to stand there confidently and say, yeah, I'm worth it, the likelihood of achieving whatever they're set out to achieving, it increases drastically, And so those are sort of the three questions I like to frame up for people if they're looking to tweak whatever it is in their life, as it relates to potential. I mean, potential is usually just something that's just sitting there. It doesn't actually materialize unless we do something about it, because it just turns. It's this potential energy which transforms into something else, but we have to choose to do something. There's an action that needs to be taken. Just choosing to do something differently is great, but you got to actually do the action following the act of choosing. So anyways, that was a bit of a long-winded response to a rather simple question, but that's just how I go.
Well, look, long-winded responses are so encouraged on this show. Okay. It is unbelievable. Like, I prefer long-winded answers because that's where the magic is. Actually, I think there's a gentleman by the name of R.L. Mencken who said something to the effect of, for every problem, there's a solution, or a simple solution, clear, concise, and wrong. Right. So I would rather have the full solution, and let's flesh it out. Let's talk about it because it's important. And your experiences and doing the things that you've done and working with so many people and overcoming the things that you have, that is such a treasure trove of wisdom, and your experiences are just incredible that please, let's take the time to explore those long-winded answers. So anyways, I'll hop off that really quick. I'm curious to learn, because this is something that I find a lot of people my age and younger than me, especially in the college age, the early 20s. Yeah. I feel like so many people struggle with this, and I can't wait to hear your philosophy on this. Clearly, I really like philosophy. That's why I keep asking about it. But in order to set those goals, the really scary ones, the meaningful ones, in order to really get clear on, being able to know what you're asking those three questions about, I believe we have to know what we want. We have to make that decision. Okay, I want to get there. I want to accomplish X, Y, Z, whatever it may be. Right. But for a lot of people, they're very conflicted about, okay, what do I really want? What's really important to me? What do I care about? Who do I want to be? Who do I want to be? I've studied Ben Franklin pretty extensively, and based on my research, what I believe, and I believe this because it seems like a lot of historians collectively agree, and I'd love to ask him, but he's not here to ask, is that first and foremost, he was a publisher. He saw himself, a printer. He saw himself as a printer. And so my question is, how do you figure out what you want to do, who you want to be? where you want to go? Because it seems like that's the foundational step.
Well, sheesh, another famous dude who I'd love to talk to sometime is Mark Twain. And Mark Twain has a very famous quote that says, the two most important days of our life is one, the day we're born, but second, the day we figure out why. That one always hits me because we sit around thinking, well, what is my why? Right? Simon Sinek says, start with the why. I'm like, well, but what is it? It's great to start there. What is it? And it's just such a big question, but discovering it is the key. Like if you just sit around doing the same thing day in, day out, feeling unfulfilled, feeling like you are not meeting what you may have felt at one point in your life like you could achieve. When we talk about this missed potential, it's just more so untapped than anything. It's not like it's missing, it's there. We're just not tapping into it and doing something with this. And because we've become disconnected with whatever those dreams and ambitions or visions were that we had at one point in time. Now, if you have never had that, I often find people have. There's been a point in their life, whether maybe they were 5 or 6, and they had an ambition to do something or to live a certain life or a certain way or be around certain people. Why did that change? What happened? And yeah, there's sometimes traumatic experiences that have occurred. And sometimes there's things that are outside of our control that's affected us deeply. And I get it. I acknowledge that. I'm not going to dismiss that. But right now, it's always a clean slate in front of us. Tomorrow's not defined. Right now, we can define what we want to do and how we want to think or who we're associating with. And so I always like to just encourage people, just start living a life that's in alignment with some of your passions. I find that when we get clarity on what we're passionate about, things that excite us. I love the Japanese term ikigai. That is this term, this idea of basically why you get up in the morning. It's this deep sense of purpose that just drives them. And something to note, which some people aren't familiar with, but the Japanese don't have a term for retirement or retire. Like there's no term for that because they believe that if you're living your ikigai, you do that till the day you die. Like your passions, your purpose, it doesn't just, evaporate one day. It's there with you. It's part of you. And so why would you ever want to stop doing that? Dan Buttner's work with the blue zones, these 5 areas around the world where they have more people living to be 100 plus and not just waiting to die kind of 100-year-old people, right? Like these are people that are thriving. They're kicking it. They're gardening. They're connecting with friends and family. They're integral to the communities that they live within. They're making certain nutritionary choices, largely plant-based. They're active every day. They're gardening. They're dancing. They're just living a good life and they're thriving. So why can't that be replicated? Well, it can, right? Like it really can. There's nothing that's not rocket science, it's they're just living a good life and they're thriving and benefiting from that. And everybody else is as well. And so, figuring out what it is that you're passionate about, I think is step one. And you just got to go out and do different things, figure it out, like have fun with it. It shouldn't be a chore. If it's a chore, then it's probably not a passion. Like when you find it and you figure out that thing that you love, I've seen some of your podcasts, Ben, and some of your interviews. I can tell you're someone that just loves to connect with people, to share a message, to get a message out there, to make an impact. I mean, clearly that's a passion, And then once we get the passion sort of dialed in, sort of at least so we're a lot more confident with that, then we want to start talking in the terms of purpose. Okay, well, what's my purpose? How do I channel this passion to feel like I'm being more util? Like my utility, my self-value for what I'm producing or creating or putting out there. That's where I find purpose comes into play. It's sort of our way of channeling the passion. And then thirdly, there's another P I always talk about, and that's process. So you have passion, purpose, process. Because there is very often for a lot of things that we want to achieve, a process that can be followed either in learning or acquiring the skills needed to create maybe a business or to scale a business. It really depends on the stage we're at, but there's usually processes or blueprints or some steps that we can take, and it's not a matter of trying to reinvent the wheel every time or to create something from scratch. we can find very often in this beautiful world we have with 7 billion plus people on it, there's probably been someone that's tried something similar. Well, what did they do? You know, look at it, history. You know, what does it have to teach us? Is there anything that we can learn from that? I mean, I think about all the different books I've read in my life, and my goodness, I've always picked up something from every book. That's given me more ideas on processes, you know, and ways of living, ways of choosing how to live, and ways of being. And so I think those three are really critical. But this idea of passion, finding the thing that just lights you up, man, like just gets you like, whoa, I love doing this. If money was out of the question, I wouldn't care. I'd still be doing this because I'm passionate about it. But there's a difference between passions and hobbies, right? Hobbies are great. I love hobbies. I have hobbies, but they're not so important to me that I want to do them all the time. I enjoy them. They provide me great value, but it doesn't light me up, you know, and I like to let people know that. Some people start businesses, you know, I work with some people, and a number of people, just based on my past background in business, I tend to coach and mentor people in that space. And, you know, it's really interesting because I think a lot of people struggle, you know, going from hobbyist to entrepreneur, in many cases solopreneur, and making that leap. And sometimes I think it's the motivations are a little bit askew. You know, they're not super clear on why they want to do it. They have a lifestyle vision for themselves, how they want to be living life, and they feel that that might be the best vehicle to achieve that. Problem is all of a sudden you achieve that lifestyle, but they were never really passionate about what they were doing. You know, they were just trying to create something that would provide a vehicle to now live a life a certain way. But there's often a disconnect or a dissatisfaction that happens over time, and we lose interest. When we lose interest, you know, have you read The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks?
I have not, but I am going to immediately add that to my reading list.
It's super cool. It's such a great book, and it's made a big impact in my life. But he talks, you've probably heard the term zone of genius, and he's the one that coined that. And so he talks about just these ways that we sort of do things. And I would always equate that zone of genius very much in alignment to our passions. But he talks about these points where we get to this high level of zone of competence, but not zone of genius, but we're competent. We're good at what we do. Like, and we also have a zone of expertise. And I think a lot of us end up working in that level, that expertise, rather than ever going to that zone of genius. Because so all of a sudden, when you're working in your passions, you're earning a great living doing that. Sometimes we get so happy and so joyful. He says our tendency is to want to self-sabotage because we almost feel like we don't deserve it. Remember going back to that question? Remember the one about, am I worth it?
Am I worth it?
Yeah, there's this disconnect. And a lot of times deep down, we don't feel like we deserve it. All of a sudden we start to receive the accolades, the success, and all of a sudden we're living more and more every day in like a life of abundance. And we're like, okay, this is too good to be true. Oh my gosh, this can't be true. You know, and we have these tendencies to completely self-sabotage ourselves. And he's documented this and researched it. And it's just remarkable because all of a sudden I read it and I'm like, oh, I remember when I did that. Oh yeah, I've got that. You know, like you start to identify with some of these scenarios where we do something that throws us off. You know, it's really, I mean, if you look at some of the famous sports celebrities, you know, that have fallen from grace, usually based on one mistake. You know, they did one thing. It's like, why would they do that? They were at the top of their career. What the heck? And it's this subconscious thing that we do at times. And so anyways, it's just like, I don't even, did I even answer the question? Yeah. Passion, purpose, process. Okay. Figure out your passion first, then talk about how you can channel the passion to deliver and feel more connected with the purpose and the utility or this reason of being. And then lastly, to help you do that, figure out a process to follow. So there's the answer for me. That's what's worked for me. Okay. So always from my eye perspective here, it may not work for you, but unless you try, you just never know.
Exactly. And by the way, not only did you answer that question, but you answered like a whole bunch of other questions. So that was just bonus gold for us. So thank you for that. But I also think it's really important to consider, you know, as somebody who may be like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Let me try it. Let me try. Let me try to go find my passion, right?
Right.
It's not going to happen overnight.
No. Hell no.
Okay. For most people. Now you may just flip a switch and you may get out your handy dandy notebook and journal, which hopefully everybody's doing because it's really helpful for your brain and it's just awesome. And you write down a list of things that you're like, this is what I'm passionate about, or this is, this is what I'm going to do. And then you find it immediately. I hope that happens for everybody who's watching, listening. Chances are it's probably not going to happen. Right. So it's okay. It's okay. Just try stuff, figure it out, go and find something that you really enjoy doing and that you don't get tired of doing. Look, this show, I published over 200 episodes as of the recording of this.
Congratulations. This is
it doesn't,
amazing, though.
It doesn't get, but it doesn't get old. It's like every time it's like a new thing. And every time I get challenged and I have to change the way, or I have the opportunity to change the way that I think and to grow and to get better and learn. Right. And for a long time, I didn't understand the purpose piece of it. I just knew that I was passionate about it. And the evidence that I had to support that idea was that I kept doing it. And if I couldn't do it, I really wanted to do it. And even if I tried to stop, which for whatever reason, there were times when I tried to stop, I always came back to it. And I've loved it, right? But just because you find something, you don't have to immediately then know your life's purpose, or you don't need to know the why. If you find something that you love doing, just keep doing that. And eventually you could figure it out over time. And I also want to talk about that zone of genius, right? Because I think that takes a lot of self-awareness to identify, okay, am I in this passion stage and I'm just chilling here? Or am I in this zone of expertise? Or am I in this zone of genius? Have I ascended to this zenith of amazingness and awesomeness? Like, how have you in your own life gauged at what level you currently are?
Ooh, well, yeah. I'm a fan of gosh, what's his name? Maslow, right? Like his hierarchy of needs, that whole idea of self-actualization. And I've been, what's interesting is at different stages of life, different ages specifically, and different experiences based on what I was living at the time, these 42 years, I've seen things shift quite often, but with more and more challenges and more experience overcoming those challenges, I become more and more self-actualized, getting more clarity on what it is that's most important to me. But it only came through living, and doing. Like, it really came through just being aware, or a term that's a buzz phrase now is being mindful of what's happening around me. And the fact that I am 100% responsible for my choices and my actions. 100%. The way I react to people, it's 100% on me. It's not them. Like, it's my world I'm creating, and Joe Dispenza's got some amazing philosophies and ideas and research around this idea too. Like, that sort of stems into this idea of epigenetics and our ability to use our minds to influence a lot of things in our lives, specifically, especially as it comes to our health, because often it's the mind, right, that might give up. And we give up on things, or we talk ourselves out of things, or like I said earlier, am I enough? Am I worth it? A lot of us don't feel we are. I am, gosh, I'm the poster child for that. Like, I just think about all the things, like I told you, I overcame morbid obesity as a teen. I worked really hard on my outside. It was all external. It was about looking better. I did want to feel better. I wanted to feel more confident. But to be honest, Ben, I'd spent so much time working on the external, I didn't do any internal work. And so when I moved into my 20s and eventually into my career, I still was that morbidly obese teen on the inside, going through a lot of pain and hurt and heartache and just not confident, and just it was amazing, really, to think back on it now, because I was developing certain habits to cope with that, which involved abusing alcohol, which led to abuse of narcotics, which also led to promiscuity and not being faithful to my wife. I was living a double life. You know, on the outside, I was building my company with my business partner at the time, a large retail operation. And we grew to about 10 million a year, and, you know, lots of great success with that. And it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. But at the same time, I'm doing that and saying that my pillars in my life were family, fitness, faith, finances, you know, sort of on a foundation of health with an overarching roof of fun. That was sort of how I envisioned my life. I was living in conflict of that, like, tremendously. And, you know, so when you're asking these questions, it's like, well, where am I actually living in alignment with my values? Because I find when we're living out of alignment with our values, nothing good comes from that. Not long term. You know, there's this, they call it cognitive dissonance, right? This idea of doing one thing, showing up as one thing versus wanting something else. And there's this constant chasm, you know, really in our minds and in our lives. Very often we'll see a parallel, and it creates a lot of, well, a hole. And with these holes, we fill it with things. I mean, we've heard about the cliche of midlife crises, especially as it relates to men, right? It's like, well, what's happening here? You know, well, there is this lack of clarity around their passions, around their purpose, around life, you know, and the finality of life is very scary. I work with a lot of guys in their 40s and 50s. And what's really interesting is when we hit that age, our mortality becomes much more clear, because that clock on the wall is not counting up anymore. It's counting down. And there's this idea that there's not enough time. And what am I doing? Have I wasted my time? It's like, oh my gosh, right? And we just feel all these stresses. And so we go and we do drastic things, because rather than doing the internal work, we externalize a lot of things that we believe will bring us this happiness or this confidence or this connection. And very often we see that not end well, you know. And I know for myself, it wasn't until 10 years ago where I made some drastic shifts, literally shifts at age 32, where I stopped drinking, you know, stopped doing drugs. I stopped, you know, at that point in time, I fully committed to my wife, who I loved deeply. And yet I was doing things that people would not perceive as love. And it was really hard. To be honest, I wasn't being the type of man that I would want to marry my daughters. You know, there's no way. I would be ashamed, and I would do my darndest to make sure that nobody like I was would ever end up with my girls. And yet that's how I was living, right? Like crazy. Like really, when you think about it, like when I think back on it, I'm like, man, I was a mess, you know? But there came a choice where I was just like, I'm changing again. Just like when I made the physical changes, like, okay, well, I'm going to make the internal changes. I'm going to do some work. I'm going to change. I'm going to be the guy that I want to be, not just thinking about that like an idea. I'm going to live like that. And I realized I had to eliminate pretty much 90% of my association. The majority of the people I hung out with, you know, Jim Rohn talks about us being the net sum of the 5 closest people we hang out with. You know, there's even some interesting studies that said, they looked at this, you know, as it relates to people that are out of shape and overweight and have unhealthy habits, that if they have their 3 closest friends that are obese, they have a 150% chance of being obese themselves. Like 150%, like, that's like guaranteed win, but you're not winning. Okay. So you have to start to ask yourself, well, who am I associating with? Who am I hanging out with? And that's sort of what got me going. And then, you know, I got support. I found some mentors. I found some coaches. I just started doing a bunch of work. And through doing that work, I then reconnected with some passions that I had, you know, because I went into retail and e-commerce. I was saying I wanted to make an impact in people's lives. I wanted to help them, but it was several steps removed. You know, it was really widget in, widget out. Like I was selling products. I mean, we've all heard this, this sort of stereotypical cliche that people buy a piece of equipment, ends up in their basement, and they hang their towels on it. And we laugh about this in the industry. We laugh about it because they're like, well, we made the sale. I don't sit well with that. You know, I know they bought it for a reason. They need some help to actually realize that and to make use of these investments that they're doing, making. And so, you know, I realized, and this would be 5 years ago, that the path I was on wasn't the path I was meant to be on anymore. And I know a lot of guys can relate to this. You know, I was 37. I was like, man, I thought that this was my future. I was going to continue to scale this company, continue to grow it. I was the CMO, COO, and I was just about to transition over the next couple of years into CEO. And my business partner, 20 years my senior, I was just, I was like, 20 years down the road, when I'm 60 like you are, will I be happy? Like, no, I don't think I will be. That's not the life I want. That's your life. That's not my life. And it was scary. Ben, to be perfectly honest, I was really nervous. I was going through a lot of anxiety and stress because I was like, okay, well, here's something that I know supports my family, supports me. I've been working 17 years building this thing, and I don't want to do it anymore. Oh man, now what? There's that now what again. And you just had to go through some steps of realizing, okay, well, what's the worst case scenario? Tim Ferriss, the fear setting exercises, and literally going through that. And we just said, you know what, based on some of the things I've been building on my personal side, like with my own personal platform online. And, this is about 5-6 years into that when I finally started having these decisions. We're like, you know what, we have enough with this, that if we downsize the way we're living life to be more in alignment with what matters to us most, we could actually do it indefinitely. And I was like, I like that. I like that. Let's do this. So my book was published. I started helping a lot more people, doing a lot more keynotes and working with groups and organizations and individuals just to help them go through this similar process. Right. And it's been so rewarding. And but I just got to say, like, I have mad respect for people that go through that. You talk about these different zones and this idea of like getting to that self-actualized place. There takes a lot of work. Like a lot of work. You mentioned introspection earlier and the benefit of journaling. 100%, I'm there with you. Some of us just aren't consistent with the exercise of actually asking ourselves questions. Because it's the questions that we ask every day that actually ultimately guide us in how we're living our life. It's just sometimes we're afraid to ask because we don't want to hear the answer. Because it's often 120% all on us. If I have a goal or a vision, do I want to share that with other people? No, I think I should. But if I don't, and I don't achieve it, or I don't do anything to actually actively go towards it, who knows? Nobody does. Who's it on? It's on me. It makes it a lot easier to not do things that I want to be doing when there's no accountability with anyone else, especially myself. So anyways, another long-winded answer.
Another much appreciated long-winded answer. When it seems like one repeating theme or a golden thread here has really been mentorship. Whether on both sides, it seems. Can you talk a little bit about why that was your go-to? Like when you first made the change when you were a teenager, one of the first things I believe you said was, I found a mentor and I started doing the work. And then when you were 32, I think you said again, decided to make the change, got a mentor, did the work. So how did that idea come to you? Why was that your go-to as part of this transformational process?
Well, I think we boil it back down. Like I know for me, we talk about zone of genius, a zone of excellence, right? And zone of competence and zone of incompetence, or sort of your hierarchy there, if you will. For us to get really good at something, what do we have to do? Well, we usually have to do it. Like we have to repeat the action. And, there's some people that say to be an expert in something is about 10,000 hours, but to be a master about 20,000 hours. Well, break that down. In Canada, if you work 50 weeks a year for 40 hours a week, so about 2,000 hours a year, that's classified as a full-time job, right? Career or whatever, like that's full-time. I know a lot of people work beyond that. I used to work beyond that. I mean, if I had less than a 60-hour work week, it was a really easy week, and we wear these badges at times. That's a whole nother conversation. We'll talk about that later. You think about that would take me 5 years of full-time work to reach a level of expertise. 10 years of that I now become a master in whatever it is that I'm doing. Well, for me, especially when I want to make a big change, I'd rather go to a master. I like to have them tell me what it is that they've learned, or at least look at my situation and be able to say, okay, well, here's what you already got. Here's what you can do right away, and yeah, this is very much how I personally did it. So I think this may work for you. Why don't you try it? And then you try it, and then you get feedback. I don't have the time. I want to make a change now, and I can go at it myself. And I've done that a lot. I am very self-motivated at times, but I'm not always self-inspired, and we talked about that before. Motivation gets you going, but inspiration keeps you going. And I can often gain inspiration from others. That's why what you're doing is such a beautiful thing. You're providing some inspiring insights and stories and very relatable content to people based on where they're at in their lives right now, and seeing how other people have navigated some of these challenges and obstacles and really live life a little differently. It inspires us that we can do this too, and so that's where mentorship's been very valuable for me. Is I can find people that are already living what I want to be living, or are already doing some of the things I want to be doing, and I don't have the time to invest 10 years of my life to try to get to a level of mastery in that area. And so that's sort of the shortcut, right? Napoleon Hill talks about it. He talks about the value of masterminds, about association, the idea of having a coach or a mentor. That's over 100 years old. That book was written, right? Think and Grow Rich. It's not necessarily new. We could go back. There's a lot of religions that talk about mentorship. There's a lot of mentorship stories. The books that have been written on religion are typically a guide in mentorship in life, right? So it's all there, and we have full access to it. But sometimes it can be a little uncomfortable just extending a hand and saying, hey, can you help me? Because then we're admitting that we have something that we want to change. We're admitting that maybe we can't do it on our own. And there's a very vulnerable act in that, and I mentioned earlier, I work with a lot of men, and that is something that's hard. It's really hard. I have what's called Mentorship Mondays. And so on Mondays, I do host a dinner and discussion for men of all ages to come and literally break bread with each other. And we sit and we talk. And there's often different themes that emerge based on the conversations and the dialogues, family, relationships, careers, travel, basically whatever's real for us in our life right now. But we share our challenges, and there's this mentorship piece that comes from these conversations based on the different experience levels of each person. We got 18 all the way up to 65. It's a full spectrum of guys coming together to have this dinner every Monday, and it's been fantastic. But we have to put ourselves in that situation of feeling uncomfortable. It's going to be uncomfortable. There's no easy way around this. You're going to have to be vulnerable. You're going to have to be brutally honest, specifically with yourself, not only a mentor, that, yeah, there's some changes you want to make, and you're not 100% confident that you could do it on your own. If you're not 100% confident that you can do this change on your own, you better find somebody to help you. You're just not doing yourself any favors, and again, are you worth it? I know you are, but do you know you are? And so just keep reaffirming that, I am worth it. And just start making, doing the actions that we know we need to do. And so mentorship's a big deal, man. It's even I mentioned my first business partner, with my former company. He was 20 years my senior, and he was really my first business mentor. Really, he taught me everything. And then it came a point where I was then teaching him a lot of stuff, because very different generations, I'm very tech savvy where he was not. And so we were able to then start merging our expertises and our masteries and really build something quite beautiful and fun. But things change, I changed. And because of that, I wanted to go a different direction. And so I did, That's it. That's all.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for the kind words you said about the show. I want to acknowledge that and say thank you, but also really say that I'm not doing anything here. It's the incredible people like yourself who are willing to take time out of their and your busy schedules to come and talk about these things and to be willing to get vulnerable and be courageous and talk about these very, very, very important things. And so, I just want to acknowledge you and say thank you for being willing to do that. And I'm so grateful for you and for all the other guests that have come on the show, because it takes a lot of guts to come up here, and I say here to get on the show and to talk and to share. And the other thing is that with a mentor and this idea of asking for help, that takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage to say, I can't do it all on my own. And I think just the act of doing that and being in a space and in a mindset and in a state of being where you can admit that, hey, I can't do this on my own. I think that shows so much more strength than trying to say, no, I got it. I can do it. I don't need anybody's help. I really do. And it may sound a little counterintuitive, but I truly believe like the ability to humble ourselves and to recognize that, hey, we don't know everything. And there are other people who are farther along on a specific piece of the journey than us. And it's really wise to ask them. Like, that takes a lot of strength. And I think that finding a mentor and working with a mentor is one of the most beautiful things on the planet. I mean, I've been so fortunate to have some incredible mentors. And you actually mentioned Dr. Napoleon Hill. His last living protege is a gentleman by the name of Ben Gothard. And he's actually my mentor.
Oh, wow.
And so cool? I am, and I am so grateful for the time that Ben has chosen to share with me. I mean, he's profoundly influenced the way that I think and what I'm doing. I'm so grateful to him. And, if Dr. Napoleon Hill was still here, I'd be very grateful to him for passing on that knowledge.
I know. Right? Oh,
man. But yeah, so, Dai, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show today. And I want to be very respectful of your time. So, I want to say thank you for sharing some of your time with me, and just let you know that it's very special, and I'm so appreciative. So thank you.
Thank you, Ben. I really appreciate it. It's been great. It's really been a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been fun for me too. And I just have one more question for you. Then we'll wrap it on up. What question should I be asking you that I just wouldn't think to ask?
Wow, that's a good one. So many different cool questions. I'm always asking myself questions. I just ask a lot of questions of myself because I find I gain clarity. It's the serotonin and the dopamine rushes, right? Like our brains secrete certain chemicals, neurotransmitters to really prime us for this seeking. I think, the question to ask me is simply, how do you stay positive, even when life may not be feeling very positive? And that would be the one question that I know it's easy to say, oh, I'm just going to be happy, 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 joy, 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 but it's realizing that perspectives can change if we just are willing to change a position, like that basic. And everything that's happening, it is 100% on us. I know there's external issues. There's things that pop up. There's really shitty things that happen in life and unexplainable things at times. But, the way I respond to those, that's all on me. And we can learn how to deal with it gracefully and as best as we can. But it does take an act of choosing to do that. We have to have some mindful awareness. We have to know who we are and be confident that our decisions based on where we're at, what we've experienced, and being in alignment with what matters most, that given the time, when it appears, we'll make the best decision we possibly can, and trust that, And I like to think that's something that I'm still working on, and I'm sure I'll be working on to the day I die. But I like to think that I've become much more able because I've been willing to practice what I think, and actually start to do. And so that would be it, man. I think that's no one's ever asked me specifically that, but that would be a good question.
Well, thank you very much again, Dai, for your time and for the level of courage that it took to share all those things and get very personal and get very deep. So thank you very much. And to everybody who's watching and listening, I want to thank y'all for being a part of this, for sticking with us till the end here. It's very, very meaningful. I love y'all very, very much. Y'all the reason why I do this. So thank you. Dai, thank you again. And I'll see y'all on the next episode. Take care.
Thanks,
now.
Ben. Bye, everybody.